It started with a calm afternoon by the water. A man, proud of his hard-earned land, sitting peacefully near his campsite. But within moments, peace turned into chaos. A White HOA member, convinced she owned authority, stormed in, shouting, demanding answers. Police soon followed, their eyes locked on the man, not the truth. What they didn't know was this: the land, the lake, and everything around it belonged to him. So why was he treated like an intruder? And what shocking twist would leave everyone speechless?
For years, David had poured his time, energy, and savings into building a quiet retreat for himself and his family. Nestled beside a shimmering lake, his ranch was more than just land. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could reconnect with nature, celebrate milestones, and create lasting memories. On weekends, he often camped by the water, setting up a tent, grilling food, and simply enjoying the peace that came from owning something he had worked so hard to achieve. To David, the lake wasn't just property. It was a symbol of perseverance. After years of long shifts and countless obstacles, he had finally secured the kind of stability many only dreamed about. This spot was his pride, his escape from the noise of the outside world. That day seemed no different. He had set up a chair by the water, unpacked a cooler of food, and watched the boats drift lazily across the lake. Everything felt calm, ordinary, until the sound of footsteps broke the silence. What should have been another peaceful evening by the shore was about to spiral into something he never could have imagined. A storm of suspicion and accusation was approaching, one that would test not only his patience, but also his right to simply exist in his own space. The calm before the storm had ended, and David's sense of belonging, once unquestionable, was about to be challenged in a way that revealed the unsettling realities of racial prejudice.
The crunch of footsteps on gravel pulled David from his quiet thoughts. At first, he assumed it was another family coming to enjoy the public boat launch nearby, but the voice that followed made it clear this was something different. A woman's tone, sharp, commanding, cut through the air. Standing only a few feet away, a White HOA board member in a bright pink blazer pointed toward his tent, her face tight with anger. Without even asking, she began firing accusations. "You can't camp here! This is private property! You don't belong!" David, calm but firm, explained that this was his land, his lake, his right, but the words seemed invisible to her, brushed aside as if his very presence was evidence of wrongdoing. Within minutes, her phone was out. Dialing quickly, she reported a suspicious man trespassing, and with that, the situation escalated from uncomfortable to dangerous. David's chest tightened, not out of guilt but out of the familiar dread that came with knowing how these encounters often unfolded. Soon the faint wail of sirens grew louder. 3 police officers arrived, stepping out with cautious, assessing eyes, not at the woman who had caused the scene, but at David, sitting quietly beside his own campfire. The HOA woman wasted no time, pointing dramatically at him, her words spilling fast, painting him as an intruder, a threat, an outsider. David tried again to explain. He showed paperwork, gestured toward the property markers, insisted that he was the rightful owner, but the officers barely glanced at the evidence. Their body language told the story. Suspicion, doubt, a readiness to believe the worst. The tension thickened, every second stretching longer than the last. One officer's hand hovered near his holster. Another shook his head, as if his calmness was somehow defiance. The HOA woman stood taller, emboldened, as though her word carried more weight than his truth. In that moment, David realized the terrifying imbalance at play. He was no longer just defending his property, he was defending his identity, his right to simply exist without being questioned. And despite owning every inch of ground beneath his feet, he felt the crushing weight of being treated like a stranger, an intruder in his own home. The air was thick with silence and suspicion, until the officers took a step closer. What happened next would determine whether justice or prejudice would define this day.
The officers closed in, their boots crunching against the dirt as the air grew heavier with unspoken tension. David's heart pounded, not from guilt, but from the terrifying realization that truth alone might not be enough to protect him. He stood his ground, holding up the deed to his property, his voice steady but edged with urgency. Yet the HOA woman only grew louder. She spun a narrative of danger, insisting that David was refusing to leave, that he was acting suspicious. Every exaggerated word painted him as a threat, and the officers' eyes narrowed further, their hands hovering near their weapons. For David, time slowed. The lake, once calm and golden in the fading light, now felt like a witness to his humiliation, his fear. His sanctuary had become a battleground. He could almost hear his pulse in his ears as one officer stepped forward, hand gripping his holster, warning him to cooperate. But cooperate with what? This was his land, his home. How do you comply with being stripped of your dignity? He felt the weight of generations pressing down on him, the endless stories of black men accused, confronted, and punished not for what they did, but for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Except this wasn't the wrong place. This was his place. Just when it seemed the confrontation might explode into something irreversible, David pointed toward the nearby sign, etched in bold letters with his family's name, proof of ownership that could no longer be ignored. The officers froze, glancing at the sign, their rigid expressions cracking into something else, confusion. But the question remained, would the truth finally set him free, or had the damage already been done?
The silence after the sign was noticed felt deafening. The HOA woman's voice faltered, her confidence draining as the officers exchanged uneasy glances. One stepped closer to the sign, reading aloud, the family name etched clearly into the wood. There was no denying it now. David wasn't trespassing. He was home. But the damage had already been done. The humiliation of being questioned, the fear of a gun drawn too quickly, and the heavy reminder that his word carried less weight than an accusation. Those wounds lingered long after the officers muttered awkward apologies. The woman, refusing to admit fault, stormed away, leaving behind an air thick with bitterness and unspoken prejudice. David sat back down by the lake, but the peace he once felt was gone. His sanctuary no longer felt untouched. Instead, it bore the scars of a confrontation that should never have happened. For him, this moment wasn't just about property. It was about dignity, identity, and the exhausting reality of proving again and again that he belonged where he had already earned his place. And his story is not unique. Across neighborhoods, lakes, parks, and sidewalks, countless others face the same injustice, judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. These encounters leave behind a shadow that lingers far longer than the incident itself. So the question remains, how many more times must this story be repeated before it is finally believed? Before dignity is honored without question? Before peace is allowed without suspicion? Racism may disguise itself in rules, authority, or even false concern, but its impact is always the same, stripping away humanity where it should be unquestioned. The next time you see injustice, will you look away or will you speak up?